Hey folks, this is going to be just a quick little video. Just something that just keeps coming up to my mind. I watched a backfire video. It was one of several that I've seen so far about this topic, where he's talking about and showing that it's difficult to hit one MOA in a real world hunting scenario. The most recent one here that just came out in the last day or so, he was having people come out to a range and try and hit both a one MOA group, but also precisely on an aiming point that they were aiming at. And apparently it took several days to find somebody who could actually finally accomplish it. And a lot of people, a lot of the shots that were being taken in the video were, not even close to the aiming point. It appeared to be at 100 yards that they were shooting at. And it reminded me of a few things that we've been able to do here in recent years to help the kids that we hunt with be more successful. Now, I'm not going to say these things to brag. I say these things just to tell you the possibility of what hunting can be. In the last hunting season, let's just take this last hunting season, off of this setup and others, we had, I'm just gonna name them off. We had Tucker shot his bull elk at 365 yards. That one did take 2 shots, only because he had a chance for a second shot. The bull did not drop immediately. First shot would have been lethal upon inspection after the fact, but he had the presence of mind to be able to rack another one in and get a second shot, and that one did drop the elk. Carter's bull at about 75 yards with the 308, one shot dropped. By the way, on Tucker's shot, that was the 6.5 Creedmoor, very similar setup to this in the H&T chassis. Let's see, Abby's elk, 275 yards, and these are approximate yardages. One shot, 6.5 Creedmoor. The elk did go about 40 yards before it dropped and expired. She did not get a second shot into it. Let's see, Elena on her 4-point buck, 275, 85 yard range, one shot. It did go about 100 yards, did not get a second shot into it, but it went 100 yards before it expired. Carter's 4-point buck was about 235 yards, one shot, did not go anywhere. It basically dropped on the spot. 6.5 Creedmoor again. Elena's buck was also 6.5 Creedmoor. Who am I missing? Tucker's buck was about 345 yards, one shot. It was able to go about 30 yards before it dropped. Again, 6.5 Creedmoor. Probably missing. I took a meat doe on a doe tag, a white-tailed doe, about 225 yards, if I remember. Maybe it's closer to 250 yards if I remember right. And that was one shot with a 6.5 Creedmoor. It went about 20 yards before it dropped. So that was the last season. The previous year, there was a similar number of kids and shots taken. Again, all one shot kills. The furthest in that year was about 500 yards, and that was most of those shots were with a 300 Win Mag. And that year we've since come down in our caliber choice. Here just this last week or two, we've been doing a little bit of bear hunting. We had Tucker in on a black bear setup. It was coming into range, but got into some timber before it was fully within range. His range at the time we were shooting for was inside of about 450 yards, and we were up against a time crunch, and we just couldn't wait him out. We had to get home. We had about an 8-hour drive ahead of us, and we had other kids with the sitter. We had to get home, and so at a certain point he had to call it. And when we knew we weren't going to be able to wait out the bear any longer to come out of the timber pocket that he was in, I let him take a 400-yard shot, 405 yards exactly, on a rock. This probably won't show up very well, but this is an example of what we tend to expect from our hunting practice. And there's, in this picture, in this shot, you've got a little white dot on this rock 405 yards away, and Tucker takes his shot. You know, he's in a hunting position. He's braced on a big boulder that we had found, and this is a cross canyon shot, and adjusted the dope, and you can see that the bullet impacts right next to the white dot. So we have white dot touching white dot on Tucker's. That was cold bore. Rifle had been carried for 3 days in the field, in and out of the truck, up and down mountains, a lot of miles packed and carried. That was this exact rifle right here. And I only show that to explain that when I hear people say things like, well, I missed because it was a cold bore shot, or I missed because the rifle, well, you know, it's understandable that the rifle was out of zero because it had been 10 days of hunting. Those are both things that can be overcome. Those are both things that can be adjusted for in advance so that your hunting and the game animals that you are targeting don't have to suffer because of a fixable mistake. Okay, so I put together a list. Now, bear in mind, this is a boring video. I get it. You probably have already turned me off, but this is a boring video compared to a lot of these, the real life shooting videos or out in the range. And I can do some follow-up videos with that sort of thing to actually show this stuff in action. But a lot of this preparation, honestly, is done in a setting like this, at a bench or at a table in a controlled environment where you can practice and work on some of these things and make sure they're good. But I did make a list why hunters are missing shots, both at the range or on animals. By opening day of deer season, inevitably, if I'm in a country where there's other people hunting, I hear it every year. I'll hear a shot, I'll hear a boom, and then I'll hear a boom, boom, and then I'll hear boom, 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 up to 8 or 10 shots sometimes, and it just makes me wonder. It's like, what are they doing? What's going on in their mind that results in sometimes 6 or 8 or 10 shots at one animal before it drops? And yet I have 10 and 12 and 15 and 18-year-old kids that year in and year out, all but 1 out of 20 are making 1 shot, 1 kills on game animals. So the first thing on my list is the rifles are not properly zeroed. Okay, now the big thing with zeroing a rifle is assuming you have everything mounted correctly, assuming the scope is mounted correctly, assuming you have the correct ammunition, all that stuff's already been accounted for. The most important thing about getting your correct zero, as I've learned, through experience and learned through research, is not relying on a 3 or even a 5 shot zero. You've got to increase the number of bullets you're putting on paper to 10 at least, if not 20. You have to get up to a point where you can start seeing the variations in the ammo, and you can account for that. And then wherever that group is, maybe that's a good size, maybe it's a 2-inch group at 100 yards. Maybe you really want a 1-inch group, but it's better to have an accurate zero for a 2-inch group at 100 than it is to have an inaccurate 1-inch group zero that might be over here, but the actual average zero is somewhere else. So shoot more ammunition and get to that, the center of that bigger now group, with more bullet holes in your group, center that, and then shoot another group to make sure that now your average group or every one of those bullets, and the average of those bullets is centered on your aiming point, whatever that, if you're intending to have a 400 or a 200, probably not a 400 yard zero, but a 200 yard zero where it's a little bit higher than 100 yards, and that's your style of hunting, then make sure that that is right on and precise, that you've got that group, and it's an honest 10 round or 20 round group that you've got there on paper, and you've moved that, you've actually adjusted the scope to that aiming point, and then you've shot it again, okay? And it's painstaking and it's expensive. I get that, and spoiler alert, almost every one of the things that I'm going to point out here, these are not cheap, okay? Hunting is not a cheap sport if you intend on shooting accurately beyond even 200 yards, okay? If you watch that backfire video, you're gonna see guys with hunting rifles that have groups that their first shot is at 2 to 3 inches away from their aiming point, okay? If you extrapolate that out to even 300 yards, which is not an uncommon yardage to not be considered long range in most people's books, you could be 9 inches out. If it was 4 inches off by that first shot, you might be, it's a factor of, the number, you basically multiply 300 yards, so 3 by the number of inches that first shot was off in your cold bore shot, you could be 12 inches off. And that could make all the difference on whether or not you're making a gut shot where they're going to wound and maybe not recover that animal, or missing the animal entirely and having to take a subsequent follow-up shot that is now less steady because now maybe the animal's got up and started to move. It implies that you're likely to make other mistakes. Maybe you're shooting in a group of animals or towards a group of animals, and after your first shot, that animal you were shooting at now is mixed in with the other herd or with the other animals in the herd, and now you don't know which one it was that you shot at. How can you take a follow-up shot ethically? So making sure that first shot is in the right spot is critical, and that has to do everything with making sure that your zero is where it needs to be. And that's not cheap, okay? So more ammunition for making sure it's properly zeroed. And then honestly, as a follow-up to that, you need to verify your zero, not just at 100 yards, but if you plan to shoot to 500 yards, verify your zero at 1,000 or 800 or something well beyond what you intend to shoot at. Verify your zero and adjusting your turrets and all that at a further out yardage than you intend to actually hunt, and verify that the zero is still holding true. And this might require you to go on a day without wind so that you could then input wind, and then you might have to see how your ammo does in a windy condition. And so, we're talking multiple trips to the range, potentially 2 to 3 boxes of ammunition if you're using factory ammunition, and so on. Now, I've got this one further down my list, but I'm going to point it out now and try not to address it later. The ammunition that you're going to pick, okay? I took some factory Hornady match grade, so it's the white box match ammunition. It was a 6.5 PRC, and I put it over my chronograph. Now I've got a fairly expensive chronograph. It's a lab radar, so it's going to be tends to be more reliable than other like Caldwell chronographs and things that I've used in the past. So I do trust the chronograph, and I was getting variations in bullet speed under the same conditions of over 100 feet per second in one box of ammunition. So what does that mean? Okay, if you do a dope chart, if you look at if you do a ballistic calculator or something like that, sort of something like a 6.5 PRC where you might have velocities in the 28, 29, or even 3,000 foot per second range, and you went out to 500 yards, okay, and you had you weren't sure if that bullet was going to come out of the barrel at 2,800 feet per second, or you weren't sure if it was going to come out of the barrel at, say, 29, 25. You had 100, 125 foot per second velocity variation range potential. You know, it could come out at any point in there. It could come out the extreme end, it could come out at the other extreme end, or somewhere in the middle. You just don't know. Okay, there's a difference at 500 yards, at least at my elevation, of 4 inches. Okay, now 4 inches may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking the average kill radius of an animal, okay, and we're talking elevation difference here at this point because of the speed of the bullet, right? So if you're aiming, let's say your typical aiming point is high shoulder, okay? So you're kind of in the higher part of the normal kill radius anyways, okay? And your aiming point is high shoulder, but it ends up coming out of the barrel faster than you've got plugged into your dope data, you might end up 2, 3, 4 inches higher with that extra velocity than you had anticipated. And that's assuming everything else was perfect. That's assuming you didn't pull the trigger incorrectly, or the recoil didn't move the rifle at all, or any other factors that could be at play in a true hunting scenario. And so adding in an instant 4 inches of variation at 500 yards, it's nearly 1 MOA, is huge. It's a huge additional factor to have to account for. So why am I saying this? Factory ammunition is not as accurate as you might think. If you want to shoot factory ammunition, you have to find quality factory ammunition that is going to be consistent. And the only way to figure out if it's consistent is to shoot whole boxes. I mean, you have to shoot 5, 10, 15 rounds and over a chronograph and get a true variation for what that ammunition is doing, and then and hope that the next box in line, try and buy boxes in the same lot numbers, and that can help. And theoretically, if you've got this box and that box and this box all from the same lot number, and you shoot 10, or you shoot a whole box worth out of these 3 boxes, maybe you do it a little bit more scientifically, and you take 5 rounds out of 4 different boxes, and you take the average of those rounds. That would be pretty effective, assuming that is a bullet that you've got set up for your particular rifle and the barrel harmonics, and it works. That can be done, but that's not cheap. What I would recommend is dabble at least in reloading. And when I say dabble, I mean you don't have to go all in to be effective in a reloading system. You can go buy some top-end premium brass, say Lapua brand brass or something like that. You can just do a simple neck size procedure, something where you do, and this is brand new brass, you chamfer it, get some neck tension, so you buy some sort of a neck sizer die that is just going to uniformly size the neck. You're not trying to expand it, you're just trying to make sure they're all the same size and same neck tension. So there's a couple tools you'd buy there. You're going to buy a single press. Go buy, do some research as to your particular intended velocity and something that is going to be very low variation in powder speeds. So, look for some higher end powder options and pick the top couple, maybe something like H1000. It's really hard to get, if you come across an 8-pound jug, pick that up and, load yourself, grab yourself 200 rounds of brass and a single stage press and some good bullets, and do yourself some load workup. And don't even bother resizing the brass at this point in what you're trying to accomplish. That's going to drop your variations down from that 100 feet per second range down into at least 50 without hardly, doing anything. Just managing that reloading process more effectively, okay? So the next big thing on my list of why hunters are missing, honestly, and it's a fixable thing, is the rifle scope combo is losing zero at some point between when it's at your range and when you actually go to shoot at the big game animal. And why is that happening? The number one culprit is probably going to be your rings and mounting the scope in those rings improperly. Maybe not using enough ring torque. Oftentimes scope manufacturers are going to tell you, I don't want you really torquing my rings down any more than 18 foot-pound or something like that. Or even less, and that might not be enough to hold that scope in place without it ever going to, making sure it's never going to move. You might need to go with scope ring manufacturers like, say, the D&Z products, where they recommend 30 foot-pounds or more, 35 foot-pounds for their ring torque and such. So, or not foot-pounds, inch-pounds, excuse me. Foot-pounds would be horrendous. But so make sure that you are getting enough grab on that scope with your rings. Make sure you've invested in quality rings to begin with. $40 pair of rings at your whatever Sportsman's Superstore, whatever, is probably you probably could invest a little bit more into the rings and get a better product. There are some tried and true ring options out there. Go for a Night Force. Go for something that, is considered fairly indestructible. I've had a lot of luck with the D&Z one-piece Game Reaper rings, to be honest. I like that I don't really have to worry about the scope being misaligned between two separate pieces, and it just takes one more piece out of the puzzle for me. So that would be the first thing to check. I always put a little dab of fingernail polish on my ring screws and everywhere else that there could be potential for that ring to back out. And I'm going to make sure that I've got them marked so that if they do back out, that I can see that it's happened. I'm going to make sure I put a little bit of blue Loctite on my ring screws and on my mounting screws, so that there's less chance of those screws working their way out under vibration or whatnot. So those are going to be important parts to this puzzle, focusing on that. And I do have a separate video of how to mount a scope correctly. But the next big thing is picking the right scope to begin with. Now, this scope on this rifle is a Night Force NXS. Pretty well regarded as, I wouldn't say completely bomb-proof, but as indestructible as a hunting scope can be, and still be a fairly ultralight setup. This scope only weighs 20.5 ounces, and it's been rock solid. Okay, in the rings that I've got from Mac Brothers, it's a rock solid setup. Like I said, this last trip, I mean, it was handled and banged around, and went through alders and the whole 9 yards for. This particular one's been through now probably 100 trail miles just in the month of April alone. So a lot of back and forth, a lot of trips. Good heavens, road miles well in excess of probably 1,800 road miles back and forth for various trips into the backcountry. So a lot of time sitting in in a case, a lot of time on benches of seats, a lot of times in backpacks, a lot of times being carried, set up, whole 9 yards. Hasn't lost zero yet. Okay, so pick the right scope. Okay, I'm just going to say it. I know I'm going to take some flack for this, but my opinion, your average Joe Vortex, Leupold type scopes, those companies have a reputation, and whether it's founded or not, I'm not going to speak to that they have a reputation for relying more on their customer service and their warranty than they do on building a product that's not going to lose zero to begin with. Okay, and that's unfortunate. I want a company that I feel like has a reputation for building a scope that is less likely to lose zero, regardless of what the warranty is. I don't want to have to deal with a warranty, to be honest. I don't. That's the worst case scenario for me, is that my scope failed me in the field and I then have to go return it. I mean, the amount of hassle, the amount of what I potentially lost, and missing an animal in an important hunt or whatever. I don't even want to go there. So I'm looking at Trijicon brand scopes, Night Force brand scopes. Okay, I'm looking at SWFA on a cheaper end. It's going to have good reputation. I've had a few SWFA scopes that have been pretty good so far, even their ultralight version. So now, on the other hand, I've had Leupolds go bad. I've had Vortexes go bad. I've had even Swarovskis go bad. Okay, granted, they tend to be in the more of the ultralight realm, but I've even had some of their higher end models that I couldn't rely on implicitly. Whereas this Night Force here, I can fairly well rely on implicitly to do its job, to do its basic function, and keep it zero when I zero it. Okay, so the next big thing that I have personally messed up myself in practice, and even I've seen it happen even in the field, is a failure to re-zero the turrets. Okay, so let's say you've set up on a shot and you've dialed a certain mount and the shot never happens, or whatever, maybe it happens even, and you pick up the rifle and you go to do the next thing, and you forget that you've dialed and you don't return it to zero. And then the next time you pick that rifle up, that deer jumps up at a non-dialing range and you're ready to shoot, you pull the trigger and the bullet's, 18 inches high, and you don't understand why. And then you look at your turret and you say, oh my goodness, I forgot to re-zero my turret. It's a fixable thing, and it comes from practice. It comes from dialing and redialing and back to zero and back and forth under a variety of circumstances, trying to input some stress into the scenario. And doing that, that's going to help to hopefully remind you that actually in the field, you're going to need to do that every time. Now, a big one for me is having a zero stop. On this Night Force, I have a zero stop that's about 10 MOA below zero, so less than a full revolution. I can get there. It stops. I know where my zero always is. Boom, back to zero. Okay. Now, quick story why that's important. Now, it's less easy to do on the windage. In this Night Force, I don't have a zero stop for the windage. And so oftentimes I'll tape the windage shut, basically. So maybe a piece of this, you see a lot of my blue tape on my rifles, and that's why it's there. There's blue tape on the muzzle to protect the muzzle, make sure that I don't get crap down it. But I can have some of this blue tape, and I can just add some tape that is easily removed if I need to use the dial for the windage, and otherwise will tell me if that dial somehow got bumped. Okay, and I'll also keep my scope in a scope cozy of some sort, or I'll keep it in a scabbard that I have on my person that is going to prevent the scope, the windage part of the scope from getting dialed in at a point that I don't know it's going to get dialed. My wife missed a shot years and years ago, and it was my fault. We were hiking up a hill. I had handed her the rifle. This was many years before we went into this. And this is honestly one of the reasons why that I have now today come to this evolution of why I do things the way we do. But I'd handed her a rifle. It was a type of scope that is a dialing. It was a dialing scope. It was one of the first we ever had, and I had not realized that she wanted to carry the rifle on her left. So her right shoulder. I always carried the rifle back. I guess she was carrying the rifle on her left shoulder. I usually carried the rifle on my right shoulder. So right shoulder meant the rifle was resting on the parallax knob on my shoulder. When she carried on her left shoulder, the rifle was rubbing on the windage turret. And over the course of the couple of miles or whatever it took us to get up the ridge, unbeknownst to us, that dial had gotten spun a little bit. And when I looked at it, I thought I remembered a frame of reference because I had little tick marks, and I put it back to zero where I thought it was supposed to be zero, and she later in the day took a shot and missed a deer, and I mean missed by a country mile. Luckily didn't wound the deer, but upon later inspection we re-shot, and it was feet off to the right. And what had happened was I had gone a full revolution beyond my zero. And it was user error and a fixable mistake. Cost her a nice buck. But it's something that you can fix with a few little things like tape, to make sure that you're gonna hit what you're aiming at, okay? So the next big one, honestly, is just failure to adjust for wind. Now we're talking about that windage knob there. I don't let these kids shoot in windy conditions. I mean, I will, out to about 200 yards, the wind isn't going to affect it enough to pull them out of a kill radius. But you get beyond 250 and that wind starts to become a pretty big factor. Now on all my dope charts on the rifles, I will have a wind correction value. So let's just take 400 yards. Okay, so in a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind at 400 yards with this rifle, I'm looking at 9 inches and 9 clicks of windage at 400 yards. And that's a lot. That's plenty to blow you well off your point of aim, blow that bullet well out of the kill zone. You know, if you know for a fact that it's a 10-mile-an-hour crosswind and it's 10 miles at you and it's 10 miles halfway down from you to the game animal and it's 10 miles across at the game animal, it's consistent, and you can judge for that, great. Set your dial to those 9 clicks, shoot, and you're good to go. Assuming that you know how to adjust, that you don't make an incorrect adjustment and you don't adjust with the wind instead of against the wind, for example. So know how to do that. The easiest thing that I tend to tell the kids if we're shooting in a minor amount of wind is if you imagine your kill radius and you imagine the direction from which the wind is coming. So the wind is blowing this way and you've got this kill radius and you know that anywhere in this circle, if your bullet hits, it's going to be a lethal, quick lethal shot. Okay. If the wind's coming from this direction, they aim to somewhere towards the outer edge into the wind of that kill radius. And what that essentially means is it doesn't really matter, even if the wind at the split second that they pull the trigger, the wind stops somehow, which isn't realistic, but somehow the wind stops that moment and the wind value then would inherently be incorrect. The bullet still hits just inside the kill radius. Well, let's say we misjudged the wind value and it was less wind than we were adjusting for. And instead of hitting center, it still hits somewhere in the kill radius. It's blown a little bit instead of a lot. Well, let's say we underestimate the amount of wind that is there and it blows the bullet way over here. Instead of hitting in the middle where we want it, the bullet ends up beyond our point of aim, but still within our kill radius, okay? That's a simple way that kids can pick up through practice of just aiming into the wind, but still within the kill radius. Now, you got to know how much, what yardage that no longer works, okay? So 400 yards, you can tell a 9-inch blow at 10 miles an hour is going to be too much, right? The potential for you to aim here and if you misjudged it by less, okay, because you'd have to get it towards the middle, you're going to have to aim actually outside of your 10 or 12-inch kill radius on a deer, and you're going to be aiming beyond your kill radius to make that effective with a 9-inch drift, right? And so a 5-inch or a 5 mile an hour per wind 5 mile per hour wind value at 400 yards would be fine. Okay, because I can cut 9 in half at 4.5 inches, I'm well within half of my kill radius. And I can aim to the outer edge of my kill radius and still be somewhere in the middle of my kill radius, and it'd be a great ethical shot. So know a few of those tricks about judging wind and just choose not to take shots in the wind. You know, that's part of being an ethical hunter. Just don't take shots in really windy conditions. But understand other parts of shooting in the wind. Understand that a full value wind, 10 mile an hour wind at 400 yards, if that's 9 inches, then a quartering to me wind or a quartering away from me wind are going to be the exact same wind values of half of whatever my full value wind is. A wind value, full wind from behind me or full wind against me is 0 wind value when it comes to marking here for windage adjustments. Going from my quarter to the animal and half that's a half wind value. Maybe it's only 1/4 of that quarter. So basically an 1/8 here we're talking. Or I guess a 16th, if you will. But we're going to cut the value in half and then half again. So now we're only down to a 2-inch value. In which case, if I'm under 2 inches of wind drift, I don't tell the kids to even adjust. I might do 1 click on the scope dial before they pull the trigger. But I'll tell them to put their point of impact and put the crosshairs exactly where they should be aiming. I won't ask them to adjust at all because that inputs some user error potential. Okay. So the next big one is taking unsupported shots. Okay, a lot of hunters go out into the field and they might have some shooting sticks, but I see so many without anything other than the rifle slung on their back. And they are intending, a deer jumps up and they're intending to lift the rifle and shoot. Well, there are so many ways that can go wrong, even if you're the best crack shot. We don't take unsupported shots. We're always off of tripods or bipods. And while that adds to gear you have to buy and gear you have to haul, it makes for, in the moment when you actually need to take the shot, it means we have a stable platform and they can focus on things like their trigger pull. Okay. Front rest, bipod, tripod, rear rest, something to get you the height that you need. There are lots of ways that you can accomplish this in the field. If you don't want to haul a tripod, use some crossed trekking poles. Again, you still want to have something to brace in the back, so find some way to brace the rifle and get that rear elevation. Honestly, it's the rear of the rifle that probably, in my opinion, accounts for more misses than the front support, or the lack thereof in the rear. Shooting off your pack in a prone position. There's lots of ways to get into good shooting positions, but you gotta practice those positions at home and in the field. So you can't just expect that if you shot off a bipod that you can pull it off that bipod, throw it over a pack and have it shoot the same way every time. So you have to be able to practice these things. Again, it's expensive. You're gonna have to go through ammunition at home and practice, and outside of home in some real world field-like conditions, like Tucker did on that rock. Okay, so the next big one is taking shots of moving animals. Honestly, when I say moving, I mean if the animal is standing and it takes a step, feeding, takes another step, it's feeding, that's not what I'm talking about. You can make good, clean shots and still be effective, but know that an animal that may take a step in between when you pull the trigger and when the bullet gets to it, I mean, there's seconds potentially. The farther out that animal is, if you're talking 600 or 800 yards, some of these guys taking 1,000-yard shots, there's over a second of time between when you pull the trigger and when the bullet gets to the animal. That animal, unspooked, could just take a step and all of a sudden they are outside. Their vitals are no longer lined up with where the bullet's going to hit. Everything else was perfect, but yet they took a step. So you need to look for ways to mitigate that. If the animal's running, just don't take the shot. If you've already shot and you need to take a follow-up shot, and you know for sure that running animal is the one you've already shot, like there's no other animals on the hill, then within your own judgment, you can theoretically take a running shot at that point. But do your best to take supported, non-moving shots, and you'll hit more of what you're aiming at. Okay, a big one here is too much recoil, okay, and not enough practice with the level of recoil you have. Okay, for me, a good rule of thumb is take your rifle out, weigh it with whatever bipods, tripods, ammo sleeve, full mag, scope covers, if you got a suppressor that's on there, weigh all of that together on your scale at home, even your kitchen scale or your bathroom scale, weigh yourself and subtract the difference, whatever you need to do. Get a reasonably accurate weight on your whole rifle setup, the mass of the rifle, what is going to be moving against the recoil of the bullet. And if that mass is less than 8 pounds, okay, and you have a suppressor and or a brake, okay, my rule of thumb says keep the cartridge at say a 6.5 Creedmoor or less. Maybe could justify a 7mm .08. Okay, so that's a really lightweight. Honestly, that's really lightweight if you have all of these extras on here, okay? If you have a tripod, if you have a bipod, you have a 20, 30 ounce scope, okay? It's gonna add up pretty, even if you start with a 5-pound rifle, it's gonna add up to that 8-pound range and more pretty quickly, okay? So if you're 8 pounds or less, keep it a 6.5 Creedmoor or under. So 6 Creedmoor is great, 6mm arc is great, 223 is great. Anything below that, you're going to be golden in a good manageable level of recoil. That's not going to pull the round, pull the recoil impulse isn't going to move the rifle before that bullet leaves the barrel. Under 10 pounds or under, I'd say 308, okay? Your 6.5 PRC, your 270 maybe, depending on, if you're shooting a heavier bullet or a lighter bullet, it's going to be kind of in that realm. 11 pound, get a little over 10, so let's say 10 and a half, 11-ish range, you could probably manage a 280 Ackley. And you want to start talking something in that 12, 13 pound at least, category if you want to start talking something more like a 300 Win Mag or something with a little bit more oomph like that. Maybe 7 PRC is probably going to be in that same realm between, I would say, 10 and 12 pounds that you want the full setup to weigh or really know how to manage recoil, okay? Recoil management is not very many people talk about it, but if you're honest with yourself and you get behind a rifle setup and you're not on bags, you're on kind of, something simulating true hunting situations, you're going to notice that you cannot get in the same position with your shoulder relative to that rifle, whether you're sitting, kneeling, standing, prone. It changes the dynamic of how this stock meets your shoulder, and it creates a fulcrum there, and that is going to move a little bit different every time. Now, the less the recoil, the less impact that will have on your group size. But if you've been like me and you shoot well and all of a sudden every once in a while you just get these weird flyers and you can't account for them, watch what the muzzle does after the shot, okay? Watch how much it moves, okay? Have somebody video you from behind and from the side to see how much the recoil is moving. And we're not talking that you're flinching. That's not even what I'm talking about. That might be a problem as well. But I'm talking about the fact that when the primer ignites the powder, that starts a chain reaction of energy transfer that in that very millisecond, it's starting to push backwards against your shoulder. You don't have to wait until the bullet leaves the end of the muzzle for you to feel that recoil impulse. It's beginning the second that bullet pushes back against the case and the case wall chamber is grabbing, or case walls grabbing on the chamber of your rifle. In that millisecond, it's already pushing. It's already moving your rifle. So understanding that, go for less is more when it comes to recoil. Go for smaller cartridges, 6.5 Creed. There's reasons why people shoot 6.5 Creedmoors or 6 Creedmoors or bench rest type, chamberings. Well, it's because they don't have very much recoil to move the rifle, okay? The last one I'm going to talk about here is just not using the available tools. When I say tools, I mean the attributes that you could impart to be more accurate, okay? We use suppressors because it makes us more accurate. It's more accurate because it's less disorienting when you shoot. We don't have to fiddle with ear protection in the field. We use these chassis because it gives us advantages. We have built-in ARCA rails. I don't have to wonder if my bedding, is a subject for variation. I've got basically metal on metal where the action meets the chassis. I've got cheek risers that can be adjusted to fit the individuals that I'm hunting with, whoever that might be. I'm using scopes that aren't going to lose zero. I'm going to lose rings that aren't going to fail me. I'm using vertical grips so I can get direct pressure. I mean, if you look at a lot of those videos on the back, or the people in the videos in the backfire, you'll see a lot of them in shooting, more of your traditional sporter style gripping. okay? And just do yourself a favor, take a traditional style rifle, get behind it, even get in a supported position, and try pulling, like try gripping that bird's, you're basically coming around that kind of a bird's neck angle of the grip, and you're wanting a good solid hold on it, but you also want to get that smooth trigger pull, and it just it's really hard to do, it's really hard to master without torquing that a little bit, okay? Whereas with a vertical grip, I can have 3 fingers isolated. I can have my thumb off to the right. If I've got a thumb rest like I do on this rifle, I can have my thumb rested there, and I can totally isolate the movement of my trigger finger. And the kids can pick that up very easily. And those little things, those little tools that we can impart to the whole system using a tripod, for example, are going to allow us to be more accurate, both in our practice, making sure we got our good zero, and in the field when we're actually having to take a shot at game. So take these. I know it's long, I know it's boring, I apologize, but if it makes us better shooters, if it makes us better hunters, if it makes us more ethical hunters, I'm all for it. Happy to answer comments below. I know that some of this is stuff that may be, maybe a challenge for some, but do your best to make yourself a better shooter by taking and owning a few of these points, just take ethical shots in the field as best you can. It's worth it. We're hunting. That means we're taking the life of an animal, and it's important that we do so with as much respect for that animal as absolutely possible. And that begins with a proper rifle and ammunition setup, properly zeroed, and everything else in between. So thanks for watching.